from the great northern wilderness. I bid you all good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. My name is Leah Prime, and this is the Invisible Night School. For those of you just joining us, the Invisible Night School is a small consortium of lay researchers and scholars pursuing the study and exploration of ufology, high strangeness, and the phenomena. INS is not a monolith. We represent varied ideas, backgrounds, disciplines, and experiences, and seek to engage in good faith dialogue with other curious minds. So tonight we're running on a little bit of a skeleton crew. We have Nick fulfilling family obligations, and we have Lewis taking care of life stuff. So instead, it will be myself and beloved Campbell leading the show. So I'm going to get him added to the stream here. Campbell, how are you, friend?
Very well. How are you, Leah?
Oh, I'm just a little pinch of heaven. It is. You'll see, I'm in my braids tonight because I am literally just peeled my ass off the ski slopes, buzzed my way back home, and like dove right in front of my computer so we could run this show.
You're living the life.
I am. I'm living. Look, between UFOs and work sabbatical and ski season, this has been a very, very good winter for me. So yeah, and I see that we're also joined by some of our standard characters. The Earth. Hey, good to see you.
Hey.
We'll actually be having the Earth on as a guest sometime in late March. Super excited for that.
Yeah,
Sways. Yeah. Our weekly regular Vancouver guy, also known as Jeff Knox, probably one of the most knowledgeable and encyclopedic resources when it comes to ufology. Michael Huntington, great to see you, man. Lord Ludacris. Yeah. And I think we have Spooky here too, but
I saw his name in there somewhere.
Yeah, here we go. Here's Spooky. Hey, Spooky. Yeah. RPK, what's going on, man? Glad to see you here. I know you're a big Estimate of the Situation fan. Oh, and Bree, what's up? Yes, I am not exactly a ski bunny, more like a snow bitch, but ski bunny is also fine.
What's the difference there? Or do you dare go with
it? So tonight we're joined by Tom Orzechowski, whose work on Estimate of the Situation is amazing. I actually have a couple copies right next to me here at my desk. Gave it a read last week. It's pretty amazing for a lot of different reasons. I'm super, super excited to welcome him to the show. His work on Estimate of the Situation, it's basically a graphic novel based on declassified documents and historical research associated with the beginning of the UFO phenomenon here in the United States, and covers a lot of the US military's response. So I know he's backstage now, so I'm going to get him added to the stream and welcome him to INS.
Hey guys.
Hey, how are you, Tom?
Good. I just got out of work, so I had to rush here and just make sure everything's set up. But I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to finally talk to somebody about UFOs.
Yes, I'm sure you don't do that regularly at all.
I actually do open with it. It's embarrassing, but I throw it out in conversations a lot. I usually get a lot of oh yeah, okay, that's cool, and they walk away. So. It's hit or miss.
You get there are probably some good conversations too, though. Some people probably really connect on that, right? Like you get some neat people sort of open.
Yeah, it's really cool because sometimes someone it'll just be I don't know, an old lady on set or something, and she'll light up and be like, oh my god, and start oh, I saw this thing with Lou Elizondo or blah blah blah, someone you would never expect. So it's cool in that sense that this topic transcends where we came from, who we are. It's got that universal curiosity that I think attracts a lot of people.
Yeah, one of the things we've talked about on this show is how it's one of those subjects where once you say you're into it, people always share their stories. Nick, who's absent tonight, has a good story about how the weed store guy always tells him UFO stories whenever he comes in. And I've had that experience too, where as soon as I kind of surreptitiously allude to the fact that I'm into weird stuff, people see that as just a green light to share all their weird stories and weird experiences, which is actually kind of cool. I love hearing people's stories.
Yeah, no, you get surprised too at how weird they get. You're just sometimes they come out of left field and whoa, is that person really telling the truth? Because it's so out there, but you just never expect it. But again, it just shows how wide this phenomenon, how big it is.
Mm-hmm. How big it is, and also how it captivates the popular imagination. For
Oh
me,
yeah.
who aren't UFO people, quote unquote, in my experience, have always been really interested and fascinated in the subject, or at least have some kind of like emotional tie to it, whether it's through media or books or really liking the X-Files or something like that. It's pretty unusual to meet someone who greets the subject with any kind of derision or dismissal.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like, and it's probably why I did estimate the situation. A lot of that is, yeah, the subject has been treated really poorly across media. So, like, if you were lucky enough to grow up like with the X Files and things like Taken or Dark Skies, for instance, like, you had a really cool introduction into like what it is. But then 90% of the other stuff, it's like it's always like an alien invasion, Independence Day thing. The alien's a bug.
Mars
It just
Attacks.
Yeah. Oh, Mars Attacks, I feel like, is a great parody about it. Just like took
It's a
all
great
that.
movie.
Yeah, it took all the stereotypes and was like, all right, well, we'll just make it as ridiculous as we can, So it's tough because it depends on what your exposure is to it. And I find that the strongest or the best exposure to it is people who've had like a direct experience with something they can't explain. They're usually probably like my favorite people to talk to.
Hmm. Yeah, mine too. I talk a lot on this show. I would characterize a number of my closest friends are what I would say are like real deal experiencers that have shared their experiences with me. I'm not, but I'm always very curious and interested in hearing their backgrounds and stories and narratives. Um, and it always, I'm kind of with you, like talking about the little old lady who shares a story. I'm always amazed at how otherwise totally normal people seem, and then they break open and share their cosmology with you, and it's just like another level compared to what
It's
you hear from
wild.
like, it's totally wild. It's super cool.
Yeah, it's one of those. It's again, it's part of the human experience. Like whether people, they want to dismiss it or not, like this phenomenon is it's intricately part of the human experience. Whether it is alien or not alien, it's something that like we can't really deny. Whether it's there's all sorts of theories. Like it's all mental, it's a social contagion, it's actually extraterrestrials, interdimensional, whatever. It's still part of like what makes us human in a sense that like it makes us question what is in front of us and what is out there, what else aren't we seeing.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
how did you become interested in the subject? Could you tell us a little bit about your background in exploring it, whether you've had any observations yourself and things like that?
I mean, when I was younger, for some reason I always gravitated towards things like the X Files, and I think I just have a deep mistrust of the system, and I kind of catered to it, and it got me asking questions, introduced me all sorts of different concepts, and I did have. So I have like two experiences I always point to. One, I'm pretty sure was my 8-year-old imagination, where I was walking down the street with my family, and I look up in the sky and I just see this gigantic UFO hovering next to my building, in front of everybody. It was like 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, so it was nighttime, but it was there for a split second, and I'm pretty sure that was my overactive imagination. But even so, it left such an imprint on me, like because I couldn't when I was 8 years old, I couldn't explain it. I was like, what the hell? Like, like what was that? Like, and I remember the shape, I remember the color, all of that. So it had a profound effect on me like that. But as far as like a real, I don't know what you want, a sighting experience, I did see something maybe it was like 2012 Cherry Springs State Park, which is like a nice dark sky park, and we're all camping, and we just saw like uh, this like green orbish blob just move across the sky, stop, then like do a bunch of things, and slowly fade out. And all of us were like, "What? Did you guys see that?" And again, it could be a multitude of things, but the idea that I don't know is more interesting to me sometimes than what it actually is, if that makes any sense.
It makes
It's very
total
interesting.
sense. I mean, unknown experiences and phenomena capture human imagination. It gives you the opportunity to sort of interpret and creatively explore. And
Yeah, yeah,
I've been to Cherry Springs. It's in Pennsylvania, right?
oh yeah, it's beautiful.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I went to an astronomy thing there a couple of years ago. in Camp
Yeah, they
Devens.
have that whole
It's
field
really
where you can
amazing.
like take your telescope and just, it's so sick. But I mean,
Yeah,
like, and piggybacking off of that is capturing your imagination, like with estimate, and like when you go into these documents with these people, uh, I'm fascinated by their imaginations, how the phenomenon captured basically their imagination, what they were seeing, what they think they were seeing, and the conclusion they started coming to. I think that the human response to all of this is the most interesting thing about it. I'm sure, like, you know, the nuts and bolts is really awesome. I really like dabbling in that, but like how people respond to what it could be or what it might be, or the fact that they don't know is the most interesting thing.
dude, you're in good company. When we were in the green room before the show, we were both laughing about how neither of us are case people. Like, I'm not a case nerd. Campbell's not a case nerd. I'm through the lens of like folklore, mythology, religious studies. Um, Campbell is the resident plasma guy. Sorry. Um, but also I think takes something of a psychosocial approach. So the two of us are, I think, pretty fascinated in a similar sense. To me, the really compelling and fascinating thing is how people interpret and contextualize these subjects within their lives and create narratives and stories and both individual and collaborative sense making around them. It's really fascinating, and I'm with you in that it's something that's happened basically since time immemorial.
Yeah, and like, you know, with the lore surrounding this phenomenon, the lore, quote unquote, like all the different explanations, all the different stories, like, I mean, there's no way they're all right, right? But it's just like the way
Right.
it branches off into like all these different areas is, again, is representative of the human phenomenon of like where our mind
Mhm.
goes, which again is like really interesting. You know, I can listen about, you know, well, like Coast to Coast was a huge influence growing up too. You know, and someone would come on and start talking about reptilians and grays and all these things, and it's like it brings you somewhere. You know, whether you agree or disagree, or you know the person's BSing or not, it's like just the thought behind it, you know, like brings
Mhm.
you somewhere. And but that's also why I like casework a lot, because with casework, it's documented by people, usually like with the stuff that I'm dealing with, it's by pilots, it's like people in the military, people who have a very uh, quote unquote square background, you know, who saw something that they can't explain, and not only they see something, they felt compelled to report it, right? And it not only like that happened, but then the government felt compelled to actually investigate it, right? So for me, that almost that sense of paranoia is very interesting, because it shows me that this entity is taking it very seriously. Um,
Mhm.
I don't know how I branched off into that, but casework just kind of it's something you can sink your teeth into. You know, you can cross-examine it, you can cross-check it, you can call up people, which we've done. You can talk to witnesses, you know, and you can kind of navigate your way through. Okay, well, this person's telling the truth, or this person is clearly, like, you know, lying, or they mistook it for something, right? But then the small amount of cases where it's like, oh crap, like you cannot explain this in any other way, that's really what leaves an impression. And I think it's what left an impression on our government 75 years ago. You know, the very small amount of cases where it's like, well, yeah, it wasn't ours, wasn't foreign. What was it? So
Mhm.
Now, how did you, when you came together to work on this project estimate of the situation, and there are those like social barriers that we kind of touched on between people talking freely about these frontier or like niche subjects. How did you find and communicate with the people that you came together with to make this project happen?
man, it was a very long uphill battle. So for like 2 3 years, this wall is probably like 3 times as big, going horizontal. I remember talking to people about it when I was younger, and I couldn't adequately like actually talk about it. I know I believed something. I believed the government was lying about something. I believed there was something out there. But when I was pressed, I couldn't actually give like a real answer. So it forced me to really go back to the drawing board and be like, okay, um, I'm just gonna figure out for myself, like if this is all BS, if this is whatever. So I started. I forgot what the first document was. It was one document. I think it was Garrett's first estimate, and I remember I printed it out and I'm like, I don't know what any of this means, you know, like I don't know who these people are. So I started piecing it together little by little. And I have a video on the website where there's this kid going through documents. That's actually my room. I just took a camera in there and I lit it. And I was like, I just wanted to see what it would look like on film. But I started going through it and then it just became like, I don't know, maybe it was cathartic or I can't explain it, but like I couldn't get enough. I couldn't get enough. And what I gravitated to was really like these old school researchers, you know, like Wendy Connors, Jen Aldrich, Greenwood, a bunch of other people. And I got introduced to a book called UFOs in Government, which I think is probably
the real deal. Michael Swords, man.
Oh man, it's the Bible. And I read that and I was so blown away by how seriously and methodically these researchers took this subject and actually organize it in a way that doesn't tell you what it is, but more documents what the government thought and how they responded from A to Z. So I once I got that book, I got more names and I decided to focus on just 1947. I'm like, okay, when did this start? And you realize once you dive deeper into this that the first actual like serious inquiry was called Project Sign. So after that, it was like, okay, let me get everything I can on Project Sign, all the people involved, the conclusions that they were making, what they thought, who they had to talk to. And so I compiled all of this and I finally had, like, I'm not a ufologist and I just want to make sure everybody knows that I no, like a lot of people want to claim that title, you know. I don't care if you do, but I know that I'm just not. I'm just someone very interested in the topic and the phenomenon and the researchers that came before me. So I compiled all this and I wrote a draft, and it was a really shitty draft. I don't know if I can curse on here, but it was really crappy.
Oh, you're fine. You can
Okay.
swear. Nothing about this show is optimized for the YouTube algorithm, so like you can
Okay.
swear as much as you want.
Dude, I wrote a draft because I was so compelled by this story, and I was so disenfranchised by just how, again, how this subject is represented. And I was like, why is there not like a serious take on this? Like something where I actually have an idea of where the government came from and what these things might have been. So I started writing this script, and it was so bad. I rewrote it, I think, 3 or 4 times, and finally I started. I found an artist I've been working with on a bunch of other projects, and I was like, hey, I started storyboarding some stuff, sending him some sketches with like the word balloons and like what I wanted in every panel. They started coming back and they looked really cool. I had maybe like 13, 14 pages done color, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. Then I reread it and I was like, oh man, this is still crap. You know, so after I met Ezekiel and we started storyboarding and getting these pages out, I ended up going to my friend John Zoidis, who's the other writer on this project. And I'm like, hey, I have all this stuff here. I need help structuring it because there's so many people involved, so many different branches of the government. And John is a total non-believer, so it was a really hard sell. But once I showed him the pages, I'm like, hey, this is how far along I am. And like, at that point, there was no incentive to sell anything, no incentive to it was just like, dude, I want to make this story. Yeah, Aldrich Sword. I mean, they're legends, dude. And like, I actually hit some of them.
We're huge fanboys, girls, fan people for these people, for Barry Greenwood, Jan Aldrich, Michael Swords. Especially, I'm a huge Michael Swords nerd. I love his blog. I have this like personal crusade where I want to make it into a book because it's like 10 years of his like personal thoughts on exploring the subject. He's incredible.
Yeah, it's so dense, and like, and those are the resources I was hitting up. And before I even went to John, so like I was compiling all this research. I hit up some of these researchers like Wendy Connors, who was still with us at the time, and I emailed her. I found her email somewhere and like on some website that looked like GeoCities, or you know how they all are. And she actually emailed me back, and I didn't know this at the time, but she was emailing me while on a respirator, right? And I was like, hey, yeah, and I was like, I didn't know this at the time, but I was just basically asking her all these questions about all these people involved and if there's any sort of leads. And then she gave me her archives of the interviews, which are now on like I think archives.org or something like that, of interviews that she had done with some of the surviving family members of the people that were involved in Project Sign, like the main players. So I listened to that whole archive. She gave me some more articles. I called Michael Swords and he hung up on me like within the first second. But then I also I found Jan Aldrich and I called him, and man, I mean, I was on the phone with that guy for like 2 or 3 times, and each time it was like 2-3 hours, and just listening to the command, like the way these people talk about the subject is the command they have over it. Like I still have to go back and look for dates every now, like you know, on certain cases. These guys off the top of their head know who's involved, what time, what day, the report number, things like that. Oh, Red Panda, man, I love Red Panda documentaries, and honestly, it's another. I mean, he's a researcher, you know, someone who's inspired me by the way he's compiled some of the information in a way that's digestible. So anyway, so I called all these people, and you know, I made a timeline, and I remade the timeline, and I have a whole timeline going from the beginning of Project Sign to the end of Project Sign. And so once I got all this, I went to John, and at first we're like, okay, we rewrote it, then we hated it, then we rewrote it again. But like once John came on board, he really brought it to another level. It's just something that like I realized I can't do alone, and I'm blessed to have worked with the people around me. And like you were saying, like how did I get these people? I just asked, you know. Ezekiel, I mean, like I have to pay pretty much everybody. I paid Ezekiel per page, and then I found our cover artist, who's phenomenal, Derry Fletcher. He gave me such an obscenely low rate for some of his work, and like honestly, like I can't like stuff like this, you know. And then here's the other one that everyone knows, and he's got like 6 more. And so all these people together really elevated this project, and like I could not have done it without them, you know. But long story short, I just asked, and I think once people found out I was serious about it, with the material I had, they were like, okay, yeah, I'll help out, or I'll be a part of it.
There is this incredible spirit of generosity within this community, particularly if you approach people with good faith and openness, right? Like you're not coming in swinging and denigrating anyone, but instead are kind of coming in with like, I don't know, a pure heart and pure intentions. I've always been very impressed with the willingness for people to assist, provide resources, jump on calls. And I think, you know, as well, we're contending with people that are effectively the old guard of ufology. These are people later in their lives who are probably considering the kind of legacy they want to have around these subjects. And many of them are very, very serious researchers and scholars. You know, even if they were never formally academics in any sense, their collections and work certainly rival the type of research that comes out of top universities. Like these are mostly lay scholars and researchers producing this work. And actually, Michael Swords was a professor. I think he was at Michigan State University.
Michigan, yeah.
Yeah. I think he was at MSU. I don't want to say he was at the wrong school because that's a big deal in the state of Michigan. But yeah, I mean, they've done some extraordinary and incredible work, and it's so heartening to hear as well that they've been able to complement your own work by providing information and resources to you as you work on this project.
Oh yeah, I mean, like I said, I couldn't have done it without them. And like Wendy Connors, to this day, I think she was like, she's an angel, because like without her, this would have never gotten so far. And now it became it's less about like, okay, I want a really cool UFO story that stays true to the story, because it's like the narrative is already strange enough. You don't need to embellish with bug aliens or whatever. It's so crazy, and our response as the United States government like was so crazy. But now it's almost like a personal mission. Like I want more people to know about these guys. I want more people to know about their work. I want more people to know who they are. And like, unfortunately, a lot of them are getting up there in age. Health-wise, they're not doing okay, some of them. And frankly, like they don't want anything to do with the current state of ufology. You know, they like you said, it's the old guard. They're more strictly by the books, by the historical record, where now we see, I mean, you can argue that like people like Tom DeLonge and Elizondo, we still do owe them a great favor because they brought this subject to the forefront basically. But I have found that these older researchers don't want to be in the limelight. They don't.
Yep.
They're so focused on completing the historical record that they just do not care about anything else. And it's a legacy. It really is a legacy that they're leaving behind. And it's part of American history, that no one really talks about. Because in 1947, and then you had 1952, but specifically in 1947, when all of this happened, they don't teach this in the history books. Like if you tell someone the premise of what went on that year, you would think it's a sci-fi novel, right? Or a pitch for a sci-fi film, but this actually happened. And the older these researchers get, the harder and harder it is to get these documents. And John and I, we're up against a wall sometimes trying to get a certain piece of information, a certain document to confirm this or whatever. And it's only going to get harder. So it really is, it's up to people who like us who have an interest in it and be we want to preserve that legacy. We've got to do it in our own way, and just do it, I guess is the answer.
We have to carry the torch. Sorry, Campbell, go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering, can we take a second to just lean into that thing you touched on there, the sci-fi film? I'd love to hear a little brief rundown of that exciting moment in history from your perspective.
Oh, 1947? Yes, we do have to carry the torch. And we should get back to that soon. But basically, in 46, you had these things fly over Sweden, which were called ghost rockets, which the government couldn't find out what they were. And this is after World War II. Cold War is not official yet, but the tensions between us and the Soviet Union are there because it's this gigantic landmass, right? And we have no idea what's going on. And we have all the paranoia in the world. The people like Curtis LeMay, Forrestal, these are intensely paranoid people, because they lived through World War II. So 1947 rolls around, and this guy, Kenneth Arnold, who I think he sold fire extinguishers, on a flight sees these nine objects. They weren't flying saucers, but the way he described them, the news kind of took that and ran with it. It's he saw a flying saucer or whatever. But he saw these nine objects that he couldn't explain. And he was a deeply patriotic guy, and he just wanted to know what they were. And what's interesting is that his life ended up being, I wouldn't say ruined, but it was not the happiest ending for him. Because he didn't want the limelight. He didn't want to be part of this. But he saw something, reported it, and all of a sudden now you start getting corroborating reports of people who've seen it at that time, or people who have also seen something very similar over the country. And now I believe that was June 28th, 1947. So the newspapers run wild with it. Okay, cool. Sort of dies down, and the government, they don't really look into it, much to Kenneth Arnold's frustration. But they kind of hoped that when it was going to go away, right? So it kind of did go away, started dying down. July 2nd rolls around, July 3rd, and then July 4th, there was this explosion across the country. From July 4th, I believe, to July 10th or something like that. Just people seeing flying discs of sorts all over the country, reporting it. Some of these sightings are so bizarre, right? But everybody was seeing it. So now the government had to actually confront this and be okay, well, are people seeing something? Is this a psychosocial thing? Is this a social contagion? Did one guy see it and now it's a chain reaction, everybody sees it? Is it our projects that people are seeing, right? Or is it something foreign? So they launch an investigation into what this might have been. So 47 was pretty crazy in the sense that this was the first time we encountered something like this, and our government was caught, flat-footed basically. So we throw our best engineers, our intelligence officers at it, people who are responsible for bringing over, Operation Paperclip, some of the tech in Germany, really, really qualified personnel to figure out what this was. And it's funny because we see a schism now. People in the Pentagon thought, okay, some guy's crazy, saw some, I don't know, a balloon or something like that, and now everyone else is reporting it. Where you had other people be like, oh no, this is something. This is not a joke. And in the documents, they never treated this they never treated this as if people weren't seeing an aircraft flying around the country that they didn't know what it was. It was always like, okay, here's what it is. It's, you know, a lot of reports that it's disc shaped, has a dome top, can accelerate like that, you know, can hover, like all these things that like were clearly not there in 1947. So they launched an investigation, and Project Sign, our two main characters, Alfred Ludding and Albert Diamond. So Alfred Ludding is he was the chief of rocket propulsion over Wright-Patterson at the time, and then we had Albert Diamond, who was an intelligence officer, who you know, he did his stint in World War II, and he was a trusted guy from I think McCoy is one of his best friends at the time, who was under Twining at Wright-Patterson. So they all come together and they're like, okay, look, the Pentagon tasked us with this. We need to find out what this is. Let's launch an investigation. So meanwhile, sightings continue. Sightings pile up, right? And it goes from, okay, it's not people just seeing it because they thought they saw it in a newspaper, to, okay, it's domestic. It's got to be a domestic project. They go through all our domestic projects. They go to RAND. They go everywhere they can. And it comes out that it's not a domestic project. Okay. So the only other option is it's foreign. So now the Pentagon, throughout this time, 1947, 1948, really wanted a Soviet answer. They wanted, hey, tell us it's Russians. We're not going to take any other answer except it's Russians, because they, in their hearts, they're like, oh yeah, we know it's Russians. We know this is what they're doing. And what's interesting, as a series of, like, you know, goes through its paces, you'll see that the Pentagon really wants a Russian answer, but Project Sign slowly starts realizing they're not Russian either. So now they're butting heads, right? So eventually Project Sign comes to this conclusion where, okay, they're interplanetary and they have to go and defend their position with officials from the Pentagon. And we all know how that goes. So, I mean, I went off many tangents there, but like, case in point, 1947 was a wild year because it was the first time we experienced this phenomenon from a very virgin lens, right? And there was not I mean, we were pretty advanced back then, but it's easier today to say, hey, that's a drone, or maybe, I don't know, a hologram or whatnot. Right. 1947, not so much. And that to me is very interesting.
Right. And it's not just Kenneth Arnold. This is also when Roswell happens, right? Like, this is, I think of this as like the major demarcation and first like American flap. And regardless of like sentiment or belief associated with these events, this also feels to me like it kicks off the UFO, quote unquote, as like being part of Americana, right? Like, I think there's something so categorically American about this whole subject and about this phenomena. And I feel like this is sort of its formal entree into like the popular imagination. And into American culture and narrative and folklore.
Yeah, no, it solidified itself in American culture. And I think it's because the response was so visceral, you know, that like it ended up being in pop culture to this day. It's, I never heard someone put it that way. You know, it's part of Americana, but now that I think about it. But I also want to stress this is a worldwide phenomenon at the time.
Oh, yeah.
It was all over the planet. And we have documents from Hungary, we have the Swiss, the things that they were encountering, Japan. So I think how we responded to it and how we injected into our pop culture is very interesting as well.
Yeah, I think you're onto something here, where I think my association with it being a uniquely American phenomena is just because we integrated it so quickly into our pop culture and like our visions of entertainment and media. But you're absolutely right. In fact, I have Graham Rendell is on my list to have on the show as well because of his work. Dude, he's amazing. When I met him in New York, I thought he was just such a treasure. And I would love the chance to have him on to talk about historic cases.
He's one of those people carrying the torch, man. You talk to him and he has such a command on this subject. And he also has an aviation background. So he also, I have to credit, he helped us a lot too. Like when we had questions about certain people, certain personnel, and we had an aviation question. I mean, he just responded right away. And we also asked him for a forward. He wrote that within like a night, and it's so good. He's somebody that's really earnest, really honest, and you can tell it's always he's passionate about it, you know?
Yeah, I was deeply, deeply impressed by him when I met him in New York in December. I ate dinner with him and shared some drinks and thought he was just a real stand-up guy who's done basically the yeoman's work on this subject, right? In writing these books, doing the historic research, and then also supporting, like you mentioned, other people in the community in their own ventures. I
Yeah.
think I
I,
think the world of him.
Dude, I would feel really bad if I didn't plug his book. Dawn of the Flying Saucers is so good. It's like
It's so good,
it's a
and the
nice,
cover
yeah.
art is amazing. Like just the
Yeah,
book
it's
itself is great, but the art is amazing too.
yeah. We met him in New York, and honestly, like we couldn't stop talking to him. John especially, and John's really funny because John is a non-believer or was a
Hmm.
non-believer. So I compiled all this stuff, came to him, and he's like, "Okay, there's a story here. I like this. Let's work on it."
Right.
So we did, and over the course of I think 2 3 months, he went from okay, something happened. There was something flying around, and they couldn't figure out what it was. We still differ on what that might have been, but he's crossed a line from okay, this is all just like BS to now it's like oh shit, this is something no one talks about, but it's clearly recorded, and documented for everybody to see. So I think that lends to having him on the writer's team is awesome because
Hmm.
when we're writing and we'll pitch ideas and we'll get in on it, I can get a little out there and he'll bring me back down to reality and kind of like ground me in a sense where it's like no, like it's don't betray the subject matter by embellishing. Let's just keep it the way it is.
Hmm. Well, and dude, you're giving me an amazing segue right now to talk about the work itself. So I have two copies here. I've read this one. I have not read this one, as evidenced by the fact that it's still. And you said that one's just the difference is that that one's in color and this one isn't. Um, but one of the things that struck me so much was that um, it is. How do I put this? This is very much a graphic novel for graphic novel and comic people. Um, and it has an air of credibility and legitimacy that I was delighted and very happy to see. Because I feel like something like this, like the work you're doing on this project, is what will bring people that have otherwise only had a passing curiosity on the subject into the fold and to pursue it. And I say that because it's obvious and very clear that the research done to support the work on this is extremely detailed and verifiable. And also that you took this task very seriously of only using documented research and constructing the narrative and the storyline and the materials it contains. So I want to give you just, so much respect for that. I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about where the title comes from and how you've like kind of where you're going with the project because
Okay.
I just have this first volume here and I do want to say too when I asked for questions today on Twitter I got a lot of questions about when the next one's coming out so you definitely have fans
Okay.
out there.
I'm still getting used to it. But like honestly, like I just got uh, like a really nice feeling. I don't know, like that's exactly the response we wanted. That's
Mhm.
exactly like we wanted to take it seriously, and we wanted to come across like, hey, we want to tell a compelling story, obviously, because like if you don't have that, you don't have anything. But be
Mhm.
in like that that the research is so detailed that it'll introduce people to the topic. Like you said, it's also for comic book
Mhm.
readers, but once they read it, all the people are there, all the documents are there as well. We kind of, I feel like we're clever in how we packed it in there, but
Mhm.
people can take that and look it up themselves. And I think it's one of those things where that's kind of the greater goal here is to kind of expose people to this phenomenon in a way that doesn't ridicule it or doesn't like make it into this nonsensical affair. Um, and it really warms my heart that you said it because that's exactly the response we wanted.
Mhm.
Um,
It
what was the other
it
question?
spoke to me too because like when we started INS, like the founding kind of first principle was this sense that the subject requires an elevation of how it's discussed and approached.
Yeah.
Um, and I think also like to circle back on something we were talking about previously, I know I'm certainly want to think of UFO Twitter as being exactly equal to ufology, and it's not. Like and I say that to also say that it can be very easy to have something of a myopic view when you're online all the time talking to other people on UFO Twitter or online, and sort of forget that like 99% of this subject doesn't take place on UFO Twitter. It takes place in like old guys' houses every year, or it takes place at conferences, or it takes place in like Usenet groups from like 1997 and old Art Bell episodes and things like that. And so that's also the something to me that stands out is that we were really focused on trying to elevate the conversation and the quality and legitimacy of the conversations that are going on in and around this subject. And that's part of the reason I really wanted to call out your work, because it felt to me, like I said, like a degree of legitimacy and seriousness brought to the subject that is so desperately needed. And that's how you kind of win people over to the subject, by treating it seriously and legitimately, because in turn, the people who read the work will also treat it seriously and legitimately.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, thank you. That's the exact goal, like we set out when we made this project.
Mhm.
And as far as where we're headed with it, so we are halfway done with number 2. So we are a very small team. It's John, I, Ezekiel, and Fletcher.
Mhm.
So we this first issue, I don't know how we did it. We did it on lunch breaks. We met in coffee shops, like on our days off, and now we're starting to kind of get the ball rolling a little bit more. So we sold out of the original black and white. So that's not going to be printed ever again. I went overseas. So we have 4,000 copies of the color ones coming in a couple of months. And after that, we're going to roll out with number 2. And then subsequently 3, 4, 5, all the way up till 8. And we're finding that the more we do it, the faster it gets. But we're so focused on completing the series. And an interesting thing that's happened is we attracted like some attention from I don't want to say like studios or anything like that, but like people who are in that world. So while working on this, I'm building pitch decks for maybe like an animated series based on this, and also a live action, because we have like a good UFO movie that treats this seriously.
Dude, we're going back to like the day the Earth stood still, if that's what we really want. Like we are long overdue for popular media that doesn't just turn it into a jokey bullshit mess.
Yeah, and like to go to where this started, I think is so interesting, because I think a lot of people, we're gonna start going back. We're in general, everyone to start, like, they don't know too much about these cases to begin with, but like the more you go back and the more you see like the efforts that the government put in to actually find out what this was, there's a treasure trove of information there. And again, like to be able to make something, I wanted to contribute somehow. And when we did this, I know a lot of people start like Kickstarters and stuff like that. We didn't take any money from anybody. This has all been funded out of pocket to my detriment. But
yeah, dude, I hear you. Passion projects are not cheap.
No, man. And it's like I try to make sure, everyone gets paid the rate that like they ask for. So I work a lot of overtime. I pick up jobs that like I normally wouldn't do, just to be able to pay for 3 more pages or like issue number 5 or whatever. But we have the whole thing mapped out, and now it's just like, honestly, it's getting the artists to complete the work, getting it printed, which is logistically a nightmare because we have to go overseas, because to print it here, like for instance, to print 4,000 copies in China versus printing 400 copies domestically. So 4,000 and 400, it's cheaper to do it in China with $1,800 shipping. Blew my mind. So logistically dealing with that, and then like we've kind of backed ourselves in a corner in a sense where we're now like we have a whole distribution chain. Like we set up a warehouse with Airhouse. They have like a warehouse near here, so those copies get shipped over there. Then they take care of all the shipping and the packing, and like we're still getting used to it, because this is, again, something we did. Like I always use the metaphor. It's like 2 dudes in the basement that just were reading and writing.
Yeah, you're building the plane as you're flying it.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, like we were late on some shipments, and like I tried to even like some of those people, I gave them like a cool display, which like a magnetic poster with some artwork just to make up for it. Like we're doing the best we can. And when we sold out, like I cannot thank everybody enough. Like it really, I thought there was a point where we can't do this anymore. It's too much of a strain on our budgets, on our time. But once it sold out as quick as it did, we're like, holy crap, people like this, people want this. All right. And like we didn't make too much money off of it. We were able to give like some of it back to the artists. I gave people like a bonus in Christmas, and I'm like, I had to apologize. I'm so sorry. It's so small. But like, we took that money and basically made sure everyone was okay and had a little bit of runway for the second one. But oh God, I forgot what my point was.
Yeah, I mean, you're doing this.
Thank you.
You're doing this like bootstrap style. You're doing this as a real passion project. You're doing all of the parts and components yourself. I just want to let you know I did share a link to blacktieLabs.nyc/shop in the chat.
Oh, awesome.
So yeah, because we have a bunch of people in the comments that are interested in picking up a copy. And I know I have the same one. How do we say this? We were talking in the green room. Is that Vargina? Vargina?
It's for Virginia.
Okay. Well,
that's how James Fox says it.
Yeah. It looks like you have that, but it sounds like you have additional prints of this first issue coming in soon as well.
Yeah. So what's on the website now, and the Roswell cover you have, I'm also going to put up. That we're only going to put up like 5 of those. So that and the Virginia cover are basically like fundraising mechanisms where it's. Yeah, so Virginia, it's expensive in a sense, where we're charging $75 for it, but that goes straight to the project. Our other edition was, I believe, it was $24.99 or maybe $29.99. And again, this is it's
a collector's edition versus just like a standard graphic novel.
And we still came out like in the red. We still ended up owing money, even though we sold out. But these are just basically to fund us and to continue the project. Because I know the price is a little egregious, but like the new shipments coming in, since we got a really good deal on like a bigger quantity, we're bringing that down. So we're going to bring it down to like a standard graphic novel price. And those are going to come in probably like 4 to 6 weeks. So there's a little bit of time, gives us a bit of time to get issues 2 and 3 ready to go. Because we cannot wait for issue 2 and 3, specifically 3 where shit hits the fan.
How many issues do you envision this series being?
So I think on the Roswell one, it has a layout of all the covers that we have. We see it being 8 issues. We'll be happy if it's done between 6 and 8 issues. And we have it right now storyboarded and planned out for 6 to 8 issues. It's just a matter of honestly like getting time. Hopefully, one of us can quit our jobs and work on this full time and like pump them out faster. But we just want to make sure we do it right. And I think that's also like part of the holdup for the 2nd and 3rd issues. Like we want to make sure we get this right. We don't want to just put out like a BS product, throw some UFOs on there and expect people to buy it. We want people to actually enjoy the story and in a way that we would. Like we're basically making something we want to read and see on TV, and I feel like that's always the best way. And I get like this is our first comic book ever, right? So like, if anything, it's not gloating or anything like that, but like it's to everybody else. Like UFO Twitter is so talented. Like you guys put this together. You have people on every week actually discussing the topic. Lisa, like elevating it to a certain point. Everybody contributes in their own way, right? I feel like you just have to do it. Just get the ball rolling, and like people, like you said, are willing to pitch in and help out once they see that, like, hey. Like they're taking it seriously. They're putting their effort into it. How can I contribute? And just do it.
Yeah, and we had Red Panda Koala here earlier, and he jumps into the old original documents as well. And I've read a lot of them too, and I really like that you're focused in on those details because they are some of the most interesting of this whole saga because those are available before Freedom of Information laws came out. So we get a real nice view at what these agencies are thinking inside themselves. And I'm just wondering, we had a neat question here from Steve Long. He was asking if you have any ideas of what you think your observation was, because when we were mentioning about going back to the beginnings, it brought to mind when you described this Project Twinkle, about the
Yeah.
green fireballs and things like that, and how they were seeing kind of these green objects. And then J. Allen Hynek, his descriptions in UFO Experience were describing these green objects that sometimes morphed and things like that. So I'm curious what your thoughts are about what you might have seen yourself.
Well, Project Twinkle did come to mind when, like, once I started doing like this research and I read about Twinkle, and I kind of was like, oh, that might have been it. But I mean, I have no idea. I'll be really honest. All I know is it moved in a way that didn't move like anything I knew. At first, I thought it was a little crazy, but like, you know, I had three people next to me, and we watched this in silence. Like the awe was kind of cool. And then finally, I think Kenneth was a friend of mine. He was just like, are you guys seeing this? And we're like, yeah. You know, like, what is that? I don't know. I just know it wasn't a satellite. I've been up to Cherry Springs so many times with telescopes, cameras, things like that. So like, you know, when you see something like far up in the sky, like there might be a meteor or something. This was on the horizon almost. And it just, I can't tell you. I really can't tell you. I just know it was weird. And it's always stuck with me. Like, hey, man, I think I might have actually seen a UFO, you know, like legit, which is kind of cool. But at the same time, you know, I have no idea.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. So I'm a little bit of a comic person or graphic novel. I don't know. I always just call them comics, but I know that can be a point of contention with comic people or graphic novel people. Yeah. And I was going to ask you if you've been inspired by any particular series or artists in this work.
Oh yeah, so I was a big Spider-Man fan growing up. I'm from Queens originally, so I loved Peter Parker. I loved Mark Bagley's run on Spider-Man, who's an artist, and then I loved Bendis's run on Ultimate Spider-Man, who also teamed up with Mark Bagley. What I think is a definitive Spider-Man duo, and what was interesting about that is Bendis took the Spider-Man mythos, the origin story, and he kind of they branched off into like this ultimate universe, which they rebooted everything, but it was separate from the main. And he gave the story like a level of, I don't know if credibility is the right word, but there was a tone shift where this was a little more serious and a little more practical. And like if you've watched any of the Marvel films, they borrow a lot from Bendis and this universe because they kind of grounded it in a reality where it's like, oh, this could have happened. And the dialogue, and of course you'll get people who will say like, oh, well, Bendis sucks or whatever. But I found it to be pretty good. It was snappy. I love John Hickman's Secret Wars. I think. John
Hickman did Manhattan Project.
I don't know.
One sec. Now I'm gonna have to look this up because I feel like I read something of his. He's very prolific.
He is a brilliant writer. I mean, what he's doing with X-Men right now is ridiculous. I actually got to meet him at Comic-Con.
He did Manhattan Projects. He did Manhattan Projects. That's what I thought. John Hickman and Nick Pitara. Yeah, it's pretty good. It has like some of the like more like esoteric, weird, woo-woo, like sci-fi stuff against the backdrop of World War II. I only read the first couple trades of it, probably about 6 or 7 years ago, but it's super cool.
Yeah, he's a really cool guy too. We got to go to Comic-Con. We had a booth set up and everything, which was interesting too because we got to see like you have people walk by and they're like, oh, well, what is this? And we gave him like the pitch. Basically, you know, it's based on declassified documents. It's about the government's first investigation to UFO phenomenon, and just like the reactions on some people, like you wouldn't expect it. Like, oh my god, that's so cool, you know, like, and they start talking to us about like UFOs, or there was one guy talking to us about chemtrails for 20 minutes, you know, like all different walks of life and stuff. But we got to meet Hickman, and he was doing a signing, so I went to go get something signed from him, and I brought him a copy, and I don't get starstruck. But I was just like, oh, hey, this is for you. Dude, he just took one look at it, and he's like, oh, my God, I love this shit. Is this for me? And just took it. And I was like, oh, awesome. You know?
That's so cool.
The nerd in me is like, just like, gets excited.
That's amazing. Are you reading any series now? Like any, you talked about Spider-Man and some of that.
I'm
I'm
rereading
like,
Ultimate Spider-Man. What,
mhm.
are you reading anything, or were you about
I
to
was gonna
say?
say I'm like low-key obsessed with Saga, but that went on hiatus for a couple of years, and I haven't caught back up with it. It's with Brian K. Vaughan. I love
Dude,
Grant
Saga
Morrison. Dude, Saga rules. Saga's
Saga
the
is the
kind
new
of
Star
comic it'll
Wars.
be. Yeah, dude. I was gonna say it's gonna be taught in like college literature classes. It should be taught in war literature classes. In college, it's such a great series. It's so good. I
Yeah, I
haven't
remember
I haven't
seeing
caught up
it.
with it after the hiatus, but I think it is just really superb.
Yeah, I remember seeing it like on, in comic book shops and like Barnes and Noble and stuff like that. And I always like passed by it, and then a friend of mine actually gave me like a physical copy, and I was blown
Hmm.
away. And I get
So
like
good.
when you're blown away like that by like that's so inspiring. It makes you think like, oh man, I want to do something just like this. It gives you
Hmm.
like a standard. He's great. Invincible is great, which got an animated series. A great animated series, but the graphic novel is like, I feel like so good. I read a lot of manga, and I watch a lot of
Hmm.
anime, which I think, um, I mean, people will argue about it, but I think Japanese animation, anime in general, is light years ahead of Western animation in terms of not just how it looks, because I know like a lot of Western production companies try to emulate that style, like the cool angles and stuff like that. But what they're not getting is that like the storytelling is so good. And
Hmm.
like really good anime is really good at taking a moment and stretching the emotional meaning of that moment to its absolute like maximum before it gets too cheesy, and just like letting it go like a rubber band,
Hmm.
and it'll gently bring you down somehow. And I find we don't do that a lot in Western animation, which is kind of it's not that we're not capable. I just don't think the producers want to spend the time doing it.
Yeah, and I mean, animation in Western culture is largely relegated to children's media. I mean,
Yeah,
I
that's
think of Akira, and like, I've seen Akira probably like 10 times, and I still think it's one of the greatest works in cinema, period, in the last probably 40 years. And the fact that it's animated does not detract from its substance or its power. Um, Yeah, I mean, I think Japan has really set the standard for sophisticated and rich storytelling, stuff that's much more substantive, particularly for adult audiences, for people that are
yeah,
looking for more complex stories. I mean, even stuff, even works like Princess Mononoke, like I think these are really substantial and important films that frequently and unfortunately kind of fly under the radar because, like you said, and you know animation well, like I said, animation in the West tends to be for children, and I think as a result tends to also be kind of summarily dismissed by adult audiences.
yeah, and it's like it's sad because a lot of people, the same people, dismiss certain animes like from Japan, and it's like you're missing out on a great story. You're missing out
Hmm.
on a great director, great direction. So I mean, everyone's got their own taste. What I really would love to see is, and I've actually looked for this, like an anime about UFOs that takes the subject matter a little seriously. There was one, but it's like so old that like it kind of didn't stand up very well now.
Yep.
But it's again media in. Can you talk about Japanese UFO media? So
Yes.
there's this one show. I think they actually did the Kenneth Arnold scene. Um, I've got to look it up, but it's like it's really old. It looks like it was made in like 1960 something. But other than that, I don't know too much about how they respond to the phenomenon, right? And I think again, this is where media can be so powerful because like with how we do it, right? The fact that like we're always doing an alien invasion movie and we got to defend ourselves from this unknown enemy most of the time. That's what it is, and it's kind of in line with what these people thought, at the Pentagon. Uh, but it's so culturally us. Whereas I don't know what the UFO phenomenon means to the average Japanese person, right, in Tokyo or somewhere, because I just don't have the reference point. And the same thing, like all across the globe. Like if this subject matter can be portrayed in it doesn't always have to be serious, but can it be portrayed in a way where it's doing it justice one way or another? It gives us a lens to the human element of this entire thing, which is I always believe that this topic and this phenomenon is the one of the few things that can bring us together as people, no matter where you came from, who you are, what you might have done before, whatever. This gives you at least a base understanding with another human being. And again, a very base level, because nobody knows what's going on. No one really knows what's going out there, unless you want to listen to someone like Doty or whatever.
Right.
Sorry.
No, you're totally fine. You can rip on him here. You're in good company.
I don't want to rip on him. Just the Skinny Bob thing really kind of ticked me off. When he said that video is real, it makes you wonder, like, why would you say something like that? What angle are you coming from? But again, we don't know really how other people respond to this, and maybe us viewing this as this existential threat is unique to American culture. Maybe other cultures don't view it this way, right? And now, like, it'd be nice to have some perspective and some lens to look through and see it from their point of view.
Yeah, one of the things we talk about frequently on this show, or I harp on pretty frequently, is the Western view of reality is so strictly material that we have very poor and very few cultural and social narratives to talk about the metaphysical or the immaterial experience that humans have. And I think what may lend itself to a very interesting exploration through Japanese culture is Shinto, like the Shinto tradition and animism and the sort of ensoulment or kind of metaphysical views and beliefs that inhabit the natural world and sort of the material world around you. And to me, that feels like it creates something of a cultural and spiritual and social bridge that you can use to explore some of these experiences in a way that like Western culture and experience just doesn't really allow.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, again, it's another lens that, like, they're looking at their world through a different lens versus how culturally we look at something through very different. And that's kind of the power of storytelling, and the power, even like religion. It can really unify. Our differences can really unify, I think, the masses. I'm a big believer in that, where the more perspectives, the better. Ultimately, I don't think there is a right perspective on this. Like even this phenomenon, for instance, like you have Nuts and Bolts crew and you have like the Experiencer crew, right? So Nuts and Bolts, people want documents, and that's how I started out. I just want documents. I don't want to hear about anyone being abducted anywhere or anything like that. And then, I got introduced to UFO Twitter and started like listening on these spaces and hearing people talk about their experiences with just a lot of them weren't even trying to, ham it up. They weren't trying to really tell this extravagant story. It's just like, yeah, I don't know what it was. And some of these experiences are so out of the realm of ordinary, and it made me believe that, okay, there might be two different things going on. Maybe they're correlated, maybe they're not. But there is something happening on a level of, I don't know if it's, I don't know what to classify it as, but there is a very unique phenomenon happening amongst people who are not just seeing things, but they're also experiencing like these full-bodied experiences that really it's crazier than anything I can think of, And when you hear them talk about it too, when you understand who some of these people are, they're listening to them for a while, you're like, this is just a normal person who can't figure out what the hell happened to them, And that to me is, yeah.
It was very apparent to me nearly immediately in conversation with people in this community and experiencers is that there's substantial overlap between experiencers and what's typified as spiritual emergence, either deliberately induced or spontaneous kind of mystical experiences or awakenings, which have been discussed and historicized basically every place through all of human history.
Mm-hmm.
I think Twitter and Twitter Spaces and organizations like the Experiencers Group that J. Christopher King runs, like these are basically public or semi-public agoras where people are finally able to connect with other people that have had similar either experiences or I don't want to say encounters exactly. But yeah, and one of the other things, Nick, who's not here this evening, but one of the things he frequently says is that ufology is not just one thing. And you brought that up, and I think that that's always worth mentioning too, that you can have nuts and bolts, you can have the consciousness perspective, you can have the kind of religious and folklore and mythological framing and the psychological and sociocultural framing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it can be all of these things and none of these things, and nothing is mutually exclusive, really. Like, all of these things can exist in relationship and intention with one another. They're all just different frameworks to kind of approach this huge, numinous, looming subject. Jeff Kripal, I mean, shit, you were there in December. Like, Jeff Kripal said something about how, like, to study the UFO is to study everything. And I think of that all the time because it's such a fundamentally interdisciplinary and cross-disciplinary subject.
Yeah, I always I like to think of that line from The Matrix. You know, there is no spoon while you're staring at a spoon, right? It's one of those things where I don't, like I said, I don't think anybody has a real answer unless they're read in somehow. However that works. But when you start talking about people's experiences, you know, I had a real hard time connecting it to. Like, I still think it's two separate things going on at the same time. But that is a widely reported phenomenon. I'm starting to understand that nobody really can understand what's going on there. And Hynek, even, I think he's quoted as saying, and this is a guy who was, like, you know, basically paid by the government to debunk all this stuff earlier, but he was quoted as saying, he's like, I'm a little disappointed that, like, people don't take the more, oh man, I don't want to butcher his quote, but the more wild stuff, right? They don't look into it as much. They stop at the nuts and bolts, and once it gets a little out of the realm of the ordinary, that nobody pursues that anymore. And his experience, you know, that's an avenue we should be taking. We should be questioning. Yeah, it's wild.
We have these original researchers like Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who was, you know, astrophysicist, chair of Northwestern University's astrophysics department, was working for Project Blue Book for the U.S. Air Force for years. In his book, he uses the word craft multiple times while describing the objects. And we know that late in life, he ended up saying that he thought that the specific category of object that people are describing as UFOs with the similar characteristics that he was describing in his book, maybe elementals or nature spirits. And we have views like from Dr. Jacques Vallée saying that he believes that it is some kind of presence that is felt by human development through history. It's influencing the course of human history through sort of these interactions, these bursts of creativity and things like that. Now, as somebody who's so creative, there's this common experience that some experiencers describe of, like, information download type things. And I can't help but notice the similarity to historic descriptions of things like getting divine inspiration, you know, and the association to creativity and sort of destructive or chaotic forces. And so for you, have you ever had an experience like that, like something that you would categorize as, like, descriptively like an information download, a sudden burst of creativity? And if you did have that, like, how would you describe that experience?
Usually a lot of weed and Red Bull, and I'll get a download somehow.
You're in good company.
Yeah, sounds good. Let's do it.
Yeah. No, I am familiar with that kind of experience. I personally haven't. Like, I don't know. Creativity is a different thing. I always like to think you have an antenna, and you just have to position your antenna, and like you'll get funneled something somehow. You know, you have to have a mindful effort to it. And I think Tesla was like said the same thing. He's like, dude, like, I got this. It's not something that like I intricately know, even though he's a genius. But no, I haven't. I think bursts of creativity come when you're just either frustrated or the ball gets rolling, or you have people to kind of, like, you know, to bounce off of. I don't think there's any real like method to it, but I am interested in some people like like in like biblical stories and people who say they've got like this divine inspiration, or they heard a voice say this, or and it led them down this path. Now, whether that actually happened or not, that fundamentally changed that person's life, right, and the trajectory that they were on, and in turn, that person is whatever he's doing now is changing other people's trajectories. So I always find that very fascinating, very interesting. And as far as to where like something like divinity comes into play when you're talking about the phenomenon, there's so many avenues you can go down, like Zaharia Stitchin. You have the whole ancient aliens crowd, which I'm not like too big of a fan of, but then you have some people that are really explore the idea that this might be interdimensional somehow, that this might be a representation of how we're viewing this thing, or it's a representation of how we view it. And you get into all sorts of metaphysical realms where there really is no right answer. You have a lot of questions, but some of those questions are fundamental to you as a human being. And I find that part of the phenomenon very, very interesting, even though we don't really approach that too much. We do have a character I mentioned earlier, Albert Diamond, who he was an intelligence officer. I believe he was involved in Project Paperclip as well, and he took a very nuts and bolts approach to this at first. And he's often at odds with our other main character, but he's also a very deeply religious man. And we found that out through Wendy Connor's archives, because his son said that like he would go to church. He would never miss church, and you'd have church meetings like literally every Sunday at his house. So now somebody who's so deeply religious comes to this I don't want to say conclusion, but at least has to face the idea that we're not alone. Whatever it is, that is such an interesting story to be told, and that's such an interesting experience to have. All of a sudden you're confronted with something that directly contradicts what you've been taught and what you've believed your entire life. And maybe it doesn't even contradict it, but it definitely throws a wrench in everything, right? And it forces you to sit down and be like, well, shit. So I find that aspect really interesting. And again, it's another example of how this phenomenon can actually bridge the gap between people. No matter what you believe, there's going to be a question at the end of the day. And I think fundamentally at the end of the day, the question is, well, what is this and what does this mean about us, and our place here? And I just find it so deeply profound. I really do. And, we're in very tense times right now. And just imagine like we all just like something happened that we couldn't ignore, right? Like maybe an incursion on like in someone's airspace or something, or the quote unquote the UFOs of the White House finally happened. Like, how are we going to react? Not just culturally, like as Americans, but just like globally as a people. Are we going to branch together? Are we going to get even more paranoid? Or are we going to get more insular? I don't know. But I do think that it would provide the opportunity to at least all of us ask the same question at the same time. And that's a really good starting point. And I'm getting preachy. I'm sorry. I just
No, you're not at all. And I want to be very clear. This is, first of all, you're definitely among friends, right? We don't run an adversarial show here at all. Like, you could come up here and we're not, like, as long as you're relatively polite, you don't even have to be that polite.
Yeah.
Like, we'll keep you on the stream. But everything you're saying resonates. And I think this notion of creative inspiration or downloads, again, this is something that's been with humans forever. Like, the mathematician Ramanujan talks about how Lakshmi was whispering mathematics proofs and formulas in his ear. You have these ideas of the muses that were effectively channeled creativity. We've always been in positions to basically explore and deliberately induce altered consciousness in order to kind of open our minds up to be creative or to solve problems. And what I think is interesting is how we've created nomenclature and language around these experiences that are very, very much yoked and tied to the moment in which they're created. So, in 2023, we're talking about downloads, right? But in the 16th century, we're talking about muses. and in the early 20th century, we're talking about goddesses or divine inspiration. But I mean, I think at the heart of all this, we're sort of talking and circling around the same phenomena, the same experience. We're just kind of conferring different language on it based on sort of the surrounding culture and frameworks that we have.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. That's actually that is really cool to hear. I like you're right, and also there's a lot of people that say
I
that
know.
us. A lot of people saying that the sightings that people are experiencing, that is also a representation of that idea that because we are in the 21st century, and we're very industrialized, and somewhat civilized sometimes.
Let's not
That
go
when we
overboard here, dude.
yeah, but like when we see this, we're looking at it from that particular lens, where someone who saw something, in the 18th century, 15th century, maybe ancient Egypt, they see something else, right?
Yep.
And that could very well be true, and like their interpretation of what's going on. So I always thought that was like super interesting, and I have no answer for that because you just, it's how do you answer that?
Yeah, like we've talked on the show previously about how what people see in the skies or what they experience tends to be outpacing the current status technologically just by a little bit. So at the end of the 19th century, you're having airships. In the 40s and 50s, you're having literal flying saucers. You're having orbs and Foo Fighters and things like that. And then as our technology improves, it's no longer that we're getting visitors from Venus and Mars, we're getting visitors from, Zeta Reticuli or whatever. And
Right.
now I feel like that trend towards sort of the consciousness perspective reflects sort of consciousness as like this last mysterious frontier, as our sort of knowledge and understanding of space in the material realms have no, I'm personally about to say something I don't actually agree with, but as our understanding of space and the material realms has improved and increased, again, we connect the phenomena, whatever it may be, to the areas that remain sort of dark to us. And as a result, the phenomena or these experiences has moved from being things you see in the sky to more, I think, metaphysical or consciousness based. And I
Mm.
feel like that's sort of where a lot of the conversations seem to be moving now as well.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So I've thought about that a bit, and like, there's this one case I keep coming back to, and I wish I had the notes in front of me because I always butcher it.
No, you're good.
So I hope hope people don't kill me for it.
None of us will know enough to call you out if you're full of shit, so you're good.
It's good to know. But there was so like when Kenneth Arnold had his sighting and he reported it, and the subsequent sightings after that, people were like, oh no, well, he saw something. It got into papers, and now everyone thinks they saw a saucer, or everyone thinks they're seeing the same thing, right? Because now it's in the cultural zeitgeist. It's there. But the disc shape specifically, there's a case. I believe it's in April. It's a Weather Bureau station in Virginia, and this, what's his name, Walter Minchevsky. So he basically, he would release Pybal balloons and observe them through a theodolite with like two other people. So this is before flying saucers ever entered the vernacular. He, on 3 separate occasions, through a theodolite, while releasing the Pybal balloons to observe it, saw a silver disc come in, poke around, and just kind of like speed off. And through a theodolite, it's kind of like a telescope almost. Like you get like a sharper image, and it's a little closer, as far as I understand it. And he said he saw a silver disc with a dome, like a dome on top. And I think he had a file out in Project Blue Book, which he actually never, he was never investigated about it. He just mentioned to a superior, and that was it. So when they called him in the 80s, and I think this is, I found this, I believe it's Michael Swords or someone else had a blog post about this. They found him, they called him, they asked him to recall that day, and with like a very visceral memory, he was just like, listen, this is what I saw. But what he was surprised was that there was actually a file open in Blue Book, because no one ever came to him to talk about it. But I find that case so interesting because this is before it entered anyone's consciousness that flying discs were a thing, right? So anytime someone says it's a social contagion, and the flying disc itself, like that's kind of, people still see him. People still see him to this day. I think that there's something to that shape. There's something to that craft. And the fact that this guy saw it before it was on everybody's minds, months before the wave, months before the flap, leads me to believe that there's something there, at least physical, very tangible. Yeah, and as whereas consciousness gets into it, that gets so tricky. I'd have to read a lot more books before having an opinion on that.
That once it gets into consciousness, right, then it becomes real squishy, as they say. It becomes much more difficult not to unwind, because we don't even have a generally well defined consensus on what even consciousness is.
Yeah, well, now you have, like, I think the line is going to get a little more clear now that we have like all these AI things coming out, like ChatGPT and Midjourney, where you're starting to realize the algorithm that like probably we all have somewhere mentally, but like the algorithm that's just the algorithm, and the algorithm with some sort of awareness of who they are and what they are. I think this will be a very interesting topic moving forward. And I mean, I don't know how versed you guys are in AI, but like it's become a buzzword lately, but I've got to see it over the last year or so, like kind of take shape, and I'm blown away at how fast and how good it's getting. And it makes me ask, well, if we're seeing this now, like what haven't we seen behind the scenes, right? There's always that adage that like the government's always like 50 years ahead of whatever current tech is. Like drones now are in our vocabulary, right? Since 2010s, I believe. Like drones started to become a thing. We had drones in the 40s. Like at least we were experimenting with drones, with radio signals and piloting these things without an actual pilot, which might have accounted for a lot of these UFO sightings. And I know, gosh, what's his name? Total Recon or?
Yeah, Jeff at Strange Recon.
Yeah, so he's great because he'll look at this from a very like pragmatic point of view, and he says this a lot, and he's right. Like, how many of these sightings are black projects that we don't know about, right? How like the SR-71, I'm sure accounted for a lot of UFO sightings.
Yes.
And so it whittles down that number, but I do think that once you get rid of that, the number still is very significant as to the people who've seen something that they can't explain. And interacted with them in a very strange manner, like the pilot from Tehran, I think in the 80s. I believe it was the 80s. Like things like that. Like you cannot have an answer. Yeah, you can Mick West it as much as you want, and people talk shit about Mick West, and like, look, he's necessary for the ecosystem, whether he's doing it in good faith or not. Like personally, I've talked to him in a space, and I'm on the fence about him. I think he might be trying to establish a career as the skeptic on Ancient Aliens in subsequent shows. But at the same time, he will challenge what people are saying, what people are doing. And like, you do need that. You do kind of need someone to challenge things, because it forces you to really look at it and define it for yourself, why you believe it, or why you believe this to be whatever it is. So, yeah.
I mean, I was just going to say, too, that if we treat the subject with a degree of importance and seriousness that it requires, because it touches on one of the greatest and largest questions in all of humanity's experience and history, we also then have an intellectual, ethical, and moral responsibility to do diligence in our exploration of the subject. And part of doing diligence means taking a critical lens towards what we entertain and what we don't. And I say that because I think this notion of skepticism can frequently become maligned in this community, but the reality is that without some kind of bullshit filter, you're going to spend all your time looking at blurry iPhone videos that some housewife in West Virginia took out her kitchen window, you know, when she's like 3 old fashions deep, instead of having like some kind of meaningful filter to say, okay, we have these 500 cases, but there's only like 3 or 4 of them that are actually particularly compelling. And there's nothing like, you can dismiss 99% of them, and you should dismiss the ones that are pretty egregious and bogus, so that then you can in turn direct appropriate attention and resources and consideration to the really compelling stuff. Like having a filter, like being a filter rather than a sponge, is a reflection of healthy respect and intellectual integrity around the subject. When you're too credulous, it's just, to me, it just speaks of like being disingenuous and kind of a grifter, you know?
Yeah, no, 100%. And I like, for me personally, like if I'm looking at something and it's proven that, okay, it's not what I think it is. Okay, great. Move on. I want to move on. I don't want to spend any more
Let's go
time
to the
on
next
something.
thing.
Yeah, because like there's a plethora of stuff to look at. There's so many cases you can look at and analyze. If you find out one isn't what you think it is, and you know you got to that conclusion because someone challenged that point of view, it's a good thing. My issue is when people take a hard line, like I'm a skeptic no matter what. It's like, listen, you have to have an open mind both ways. It doesn't work. It doesn't work either way. You can't be all in on UFOs, and you can't be totally all in on it's all bogus. You have to look at it from a very critical lens and be like, okay, well, let's figure this out. Is this particular thing real or not? Let me go on to the next one if it is or isn't. And you never know. You learn things along the way about how aviation works. It's a really awesome way to actually kind of build a foundation for yourself when you're talking about these things. Gosh, there was one more thing I wanted to mention, but I lost my train of thought.
You're fine. The only meaningful heuristic I keep coming back to around this subject is that I keep a wide berth from anyone who declares that they have all the answers or any sort of conclusory opinion. I think the most honest thing any of us can do is admit that we're basically agnostics with particular inclinations towards different ideas, because none of us really know or can conclusively declare anything.
Yeah, and that's where I have a lot of it's people like Doty and certain other like quote unquote like gatekeepers who have information, who can kind of tell you, they'll be able to tell you that reptilians come from Zeta Reticuli, but they can't tell you something else because of an NDA. It doesn't really make too much sense to me. But you have people who kind of disseminate information, and it's taken almost like okay, this guy said this, so this is true, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like people run with that afterwards, and I think it does a disservice to the community, it does a disservice to people in general. And it's frankly, it's insulting to your intelligence, to have to like even entertain some of that stuff, because then you get people like David Wilcock and Corey Good who will, they deserve a comedy movie, but in a sense that they should. It should be a parody at like what pieces of shit they really are, like where like they'll lie to people. Yeah, I mean I agree. I'm not going to say it, but I agree with what you just said over there.
Yeah, you're good.
Like, you have grifters who will take advantage and like they're taking basically they're taking advantage of your curiosity, right? Which I think is it's just shitty, man. It's really shitty, because what you find out later that you're taking advantage of, you're not going to want to go down that avenue anymore. You're going to be so like skeptical or like so cut off to it that you're not going to pursue it anymore. And it's because you had this terrible experience with this one person that you were all in on. And I think it's a community though. Like there's people in the community that have like a really good bullshit detector, and they'll call stuff out. And I think it works in a sense where if we all we're just open to both views, opposing views, and just like also start with, we both don't know what this is, but here are the presented facts. Let's just go from there. And that's honestly the best friendships I've made in this community. Like people are just like, yeah, it could be, and here's why I think so. Or maybe it's not that, but here's why I think so. And there's a information exchange over there.
Yes.
A fellow researcher that has similar take that I really appreciate what you've been describing. Red Panda Koala and yourself, both going into the documents. And I just wanted to make sure we got to this question that Red Panda Koala submitted a little while ago. If Tom could have dinner with 3 people from Sign, Grudge, Blue Book, who and why?
Oh man. Okay. I'm gonna focus on Sign just because that's where I've lived the last 2 years. I would love to talk to Alfred Letting, who was a rocket propulsion expert. And well, I think he did a bunch of other things, but he was like, he had a really strong background in aviation and was studying these things, just because he investigated these things firsthand. He went out in the field. He poured over all these documents. I would love to hear his take on it and why he ended up thinking this was interplanetary. I would love to talk to Hoyt Vandenberg, who was the commanding general of the Army Air Force, and then later, I believe, the United States Air Force, because he was the guy basically that wanted a Russian answer and was contending with Sign, and was, when presented this quote unquote estimate of the situation that they wrote up and gave to him, basically he said, "F you, this is not it. Give us a different answer." And I want to know why he thought so. I want to know whether it was because the public can't handle it, or whether he really think that these were Russian, and that like we had to get in front of this before, like, they came over here. And the third one, I don't know, probably, I mean, I would love to sit down with Hynek, either Hynek or Valet, just because like they're so close to the phenomenon. They're so close to at least like trying to figure out what it was, and specifically Hynek, who kind of like, he had that like hero's journey where like, oh, I'm just debunking all of this, and later kind of start coming around like, hey, there's something to this. I would love to find out what it was that really kind of changed him from being, a lapdog for the Air Force to someone coming out and saying, I really regret doing this in this way. Be like, well, why? Like, what were the cases? What was it? Was it somebody? Was it just what? But I mean, like, honestly, I'd have dinner with pretty much anybody. So,
Isn't that wholesome? Nice.
What a guy. So look, we are a little past the bottom of the hour. I warned Tom here that because we have a skeleton crew, we're only going to do a 90-minute show tonight. So Tom, before I kick you off the stream, where can we find you?
I mean, I'm on Twitter, EOTS_comic. That's basically where I live. Cool. I have a YouTube channel, Estimate Situation, which I just post really cool stuff I'm working on, and it's sometimes unpolished and it'll get changed later on. But mainly Twitter. I mean, I feel like that's where the community is at. That they've supported this project from day one, and I'm just happy to be there. And I mean, like, really quickly, like, I was at a New Year's party and I tried talking to somebody about UFOs, and like, because I mentioned, yeah, we're working on graphic novels about this. Like, oh, that's really cool. What's it about? UFOs. Oh, that's really cool. And I'm like, yeah, in 1947, blah blah blah, this and then that and you just quickly get like, oh, okay, good day. With the UFO Twitter, like I'll mention something.
And then you're the weird guy at the New Year's party who's talking about UFOs. Yeah.
But in UFO Twitter, it's just like everyone talks about it. There's so many different points of view and opinions, and it's like I came in with a really closed off mind, in a sense where I was very nuts and bolts, and it's really expanded my lens on everything. And I think that is the strength of a community like that. So, long story short, just find me on Twitter.
Beautiful. Well, Tom, thank you so much again for joining us. I'm super excited to have you on the show. This was an amazing discussion. It's always great to hear from a creative.
Yeah, hell yeah. This was awesome. I'm glad I got to talk to someone about UFOs.
Of course. It was our pleasure. All right. Take care, man. I'll talk to you soon, okay? Peace. All right, Campbell. It was just you and me tonight, man, and we made it.
What a lovely chat. That was nice.
Yeah. It was really nice. It was also, like we said, neither of us are case people. So Well, I love Lewis and Nick very, very much and think they offer incredible insight. They also have a very different approach that I think you and I do. So it's
Well, and I like that contrast. So it's like I get to ask the
for
questions
sure.
and learn, and hopefully people watching also learn something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we had like a crazy lively chat tonight too. It was really great.
Yeah, that was cool.
Lots of
Yeah, I was trying to
positive
follow.
feedback. So great. So next week on the Invisible Night School, we are welcoming Jay Shanks, who runs Paracon. He'll be talking about high strangeness, cryptids, art as paranormal experience, all sorts of cool shit. And then we're on the 22nd, we'll be welcoming Jeff from Strange Recon. So perfect segue to talk about Black Ops and military technology. Very excited to have him on the show.
Yeah, he's awesome.
Campbell, anything good going on in your world?
Well, sure, but I can't talk about it here. Yeah, I want everybody to jump on the Discord. I'm going to plug the Discord, our Discord, Invisible Night School. Come and jump on there and argue with me about things. I like arguing. In good faith, not bad faith. And UAP Study on Twitter. You can at me and complain about things I've said here.
Yes.
And what about you, Leila?
Hey man, I'm just living the dream. I'm traveling the next couple of weeks, so you guys will see the background of my broadcasting space change. Regular things, writing about Art Bell, listening to lots and lots of old Art Bell episodes. I came across a weird one this week where I'm pretty certain BTK, the serial killer from Kansas City, Kansas, faxed Art, and Art read the facts aloud. Oh yeah, dude, I tweeted it out. And I looked up the worst. He was really the worst.
Like,
and right. I have all kinds of personal opinions about true crime, and like even just talking about this is like weird and kind of gross. But Art read a very ornery fax from someone who signed the fax BTK, and it was from 5 months before Dennis Rader was actually caught and apprehended. And he signed it. He was from Kansas City, Kansas. So I am fairly certain this was actually the BTK. Anyone wants to. Very disturbing. You can creep through my Twitter. I tweeted it out with a timestamp link to Spotify. So if you want to listen to Art Bell read BTK's angry facts about liberals, have that.
Follow me, everybody. That's what
everybody follow me at Leah Prime. Besides that, situation normal. So I will see you and hopefully our other two comrades here next Wednesday, 9 p.m. Eastern, for our conversation. And
always good, yes.
Yes, always good. Have a nice night, Campbell, and thank you everyone again for joining us this evening.
Yeah, cheers, everyone.
Cheers.